right, welcome back to the artist formerly known as the Tin Can Dispatch, otherwise known as Good Book. We are very glad to be back in action after a extended holiday break. And if you've been following us on socials, you know that we are no longer the Tin Can Dispatch. We are simply Good Book.
Yes.
So we figured that the new name, the new kind of style connected more with our subject material. And we love the Tin Can Dispatch, but it's going to stay in 2025. So for 2026 onward, we're Good Book, and we are studying the good book, the best book, actually, as we believe.
That's right.
So I'm Austin Lillard, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Reagan Lillard. Reagan, how's it going?
It's going good. I've been having a little bit of a rough day. I had to go to the urgent care and get some sinus stuff sorted out. I've been sick for like 2 weeks. So other than that, blessed and highly favored.
Well, it's a good day to talk on a podcast.
Yeah, no kidding.
We'll see how it goes. Having to concentrate because I've got you on my screen below me, but I put my webcam like all the way up here, so I'm trying to make eye contact, but also look at you. It's a weird setup, but I'm gonna make it work. Well, I'm glad you were able to make it. I'm glad we were able to sit down and record. We are gonna finish up our Samson series today.
Yes.
So we have got 3 out of 4 episodes done, and then we dropped off the map. But today we've got our last episode. I think it's going to be the best episode of the Samson series. I think if anybody missed all 3 of the prior episodes, I think this episode's going to suffice for kind of not only rounding out the story of Samson, but shedding some light on the questions we've had about Samson so far and his legacy and his story. So very excited. With that being said, we're just going to dive into it. So this is episode 4 of our series on Samson. And what is our title today?
Today, we are bringing the house down with Judges chapter 16.
Bring the house down. That's right. So we are super excited to jump into it. So without further ado, and I promise that there's no ado that is going to be after this, but without further ado, why don't you just read that first verse, just verse 1, and we'll talk about it.
Samson went to Gaza, and there he saw a prostitute, and he went into her.
Okay, so this is we usually use a certain commentary, David Guzik, to pull a lot of our studying out of. And I was looking at David Guzik's notes. I mean, I'm just like calling them out right now, but I was looking at David Guzik's notes for to prepare for the episode, and he has had ideas like this in the past, kind of sprinkled throughout his notes on Samson. But for the first half of this chapter, most of his notes were basically, these are the dangers of being with an ungodly woman. And while that is something that you can take away from this chapter, it's definitely something you can take away. It's sort of the obvious take. It's the low-hanging fruit. And so I didn't want to spend a whole lot of time on that one. So I'm just going to say it once. If you're a man of God, stay away from ungodly women. So,
That's right.
So that's all we're going to say on that. And don't also, maybe stay away from prostitutes. That's
pretty good general rule of thumb.
Yeah, general rule of thumb, just ungodly women and prostitutes, just, steer clear. So, and that is to say that the prostitute and Delilah are 2 separate women. It's 2 different characters in the story. But there was also a couple of other things just in this first verse that I wanted to make note of. First, it says Samson went to Gaza. And if you look at Gaza, it's very interesting. So Gaza actually translates to strength. But in the Hebrew, it's the feminine version of strength. So it's like the feminine rendering of strength. So Samson is literally going into a place that has feminine strength. So that is to say, Samson is going to a place which is his weakness. We've seen over and over that one of his moral weaknesses is women. He is able to be persuaded. He's able to be consumed by these thoughts that he has about these women. So it's interesting that Gaza literally means like feminine strength. So he's putting himself again in those situations where, some bad things are bound to happen because he put himself in those situations. He didn't steer clear. Part of being a Nazirite is, steering clear of those things, not even putting yourself in situations. He wasn't supposed to drink wine or a strong drink, but he also wasn't even supposed to touch, grapes. So it's like, not only are you not supposed to, go to the end result, but you're supposed to stay away from something entirely. You're supposed to stay
Yeah.
away from the very root of it. And here we see Samson is headed headlong into Philistine territory, into a place with that is full of things that are gonna prey on that weakness.
Mm.
I did like one note that David Guzik had here. He said Samson did what we nearly all do when deceived by sin. He put his life into categories and figured that some categories God cared about and some categories God did not care about. Understanding that Jesus has claim over our entire life is a radical change of perspective. And this just brought to mind, there's been several instances over the last several years. I mean, it's been happening since the dawn of time, literally.
Mm.
But there's some very big names in the mainstream Christian ministries that either they've passed away or it came out while they were still alive, that while they were being used of God in these great ways, leading revivals, doing these huge apologetics talks, in their secret life, in their personal life, they were involved in very, very gross sin. And so
Mm.
it's very dangerous when we separate our lives into these categories where we say, I am a minister, but I'm fractured where this piece of me is a minister, this piece of me is a Christian, but I also have this private piece of me that is something else entirely, that is sinful, that I don't allow God to touch. And that is a complete rejection of the gospel, really, because when Christ purchased us, he purchased us wholly. He purchased us
Yeah,
completely.
that's
And
right.
he's supposed to take over every aspect of our life. But here we see Samson, he's operating as a judge for 20 years. And he gets to Gaza and he figures, well, I can still slay Philistines and sleep with this prostitute. But as we see, the moral failure is what gets him in the end. So if you want to read verse 2 and 3 there.
The Gazites were told, Samson has come here, and they surrounded the place and set an ambush for him all night at the gate of the city. They kept quiet all night, saying, let us wait till the light of the morning, then we will kill him. But Samson lay till midnight, and at midnight he arose and took hold of the doors of the gate of the city and the two posts, and pulled them up, bar and all, and put them on his shoulders and carried them to the top of the hill that is in front of Hebron.
Okay,
Wow.
first of all, that is awesome. They said, let us wait till the light of morning, we will kill him. But then Samson, and we'll see later, and this is a point I want to make very strongly, Samson's strength isn't from his hair, or it's not from, his Nazirite vow. It comes from the presence of the Lord that is able to abide with Samson because of the Nazirite vow. So it's
Yeah.
it's this bond that they make. But it's interesting because we know in prior chapters and in this chapter, his strength lies in the presence of the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
But he's in this situation where he's with this prostitute. So it's this weird paradox of he's sinning, but we see that the presence of the Lord hasn't left him because he's able to do this feat. So it's this weird situation, and it's hard to sort of make peace with that, make peace with Samson's decisions and actions and how the Lord still uses them. But I think
Mm-hmm.
we'll come to a good conclusion on that by the end of the episode here. Matthew Henry had I really like his view on this, and he's not the only one that has had this view, but I like how he put it. But he saw Samson carrying away the gates of Gaza at midnight as typifying Christ's victory over death and the grave, not merely rolling away the stone, but carrying away the gates of death entirely, leaving it an open prison that cannot detain those who are his.
Wow.
So he not only, and that's like we talked about in. Wait, was that a podcast episode we did, or was that a? No. I'm getting my wires crossed. We were ministering at the prison the other night, and I talked about how it said Jesus held the keys to death, hell, and the grave, and how that
Mm-hmm.
was access to death, hell, and the grave. My brain went to podcast mode anyway. But he uprooted the gate and brought it out of the city so that it no longer. It's like he not only emptied Satan's bucket, he punched a hole in the bottom of it.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, not merely rolling away the stone, but carrying away the gates of death entirely, leaving it an open prison that cannot detain those who are his. And this is really the dichotomy of Samson, where he is a sinful human. He's flawed, but there's also such strong Christology here that you'd be completely missing it if you didn't touch on the ways that he did signify Christ in this chapter.
Right, yeah. After this, he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. And the lords of the Philistines came up to her and said to her, seduce him and see where his great strength lies, and by what means we may overpower him, that we may bind him to humble him. And we will each give you 1,100 pieces of silver, which made up more than 140 pounds, 63 kilograms for communist units of silver, and converted to converted to today's money would be about $500,000.
Which is crazy. Okay, so, and this is something I wanted to bring up. Do you remember, so Samson's last relationship, do you remember how they twisted her arm into selling out Samson?
Yeah, we're going to kill your family, and burn everything to the ground.
Exactly. So it's kind of two of the extremes. So obviously, if somebody comes up to you and says, "I'm going to burn you and your entire family to death," that's going to be
Yeah.
pretty persuading. Now, on the opposite side of the spectrum, hey, I'm going to give you $500,000 if you can tell me your situationship's weakness.
Yeah.
So, and it's I don't think Delilah was, I don't think it was really obviously it wasn't a godly marriage, or not a godly marriage, a godly relationship. So I don't see where Samson and Delilah were even really that there was no commitment there, when there was no loyalty there, really, because, and not only in Delilah's side, I mean, Samson is literally spends half the chapter lying to her about his weakness, which obviously he didn't want to tell her his weakness because that's private. But like, there's
Right.
no basis of trust in this relationship, so it's obviously not a strong relationship. So obviously, $500,000 is going to persuade her to betray Samson, and I don't think she even like I. There's this. I remember this cartoon we used to watch, this Samson cartoon, and at the end of the chapter, at the end of the story, it shows Delilah like looking at the coins and throwing them down. And she was like, "It wasn't even worth it." I don't think that's how that went. I think
No, she's
Delilah went and lived on
probably
an island somewhere.
yeah. Yeah, she's living the big life after that.
Yeah, I don't think she had any qualms of selling out Samson. At least it doesn't seem like that to me. So, with that being said, if you want to read verse 6.
Yeah. So Delilah said to Samson, please tell me where your great strength lies and how you might be bound that one could subdue you. And just that verse right there, it kind of makes me think like, if she's kind of wondering where his strength comes from, it's probably not that obvious that he's, it is just an idea. And I think you were going to talk on it some, but he may not be like,
Yeah.
in appearance wise, just like super jacked. He might be a little bit scrawnier, or not just bulky. He might be just kind of like a normal dude.
Yeah, no, for sure. Because if you really think about what the implications of that are, we know that we can kind of interpret that he's not this like giant bodybuilder type dude. Like he's he's not a WWE,
Yeah.
but also he can't cut his hair, and it mentions here he has 7 locks.
Yeah.
So in my head, he's almost more like a Rastafarian dude, like like a smaller dude with these big dreads. It's like, I mean, that's kind of what it implies, because obviously he didn't cut his hair his entire life. He's not super strong, so I'm picturing the kind of this smaller guy with these huge dreadlocks. So it is kind of a funny picture. So maybe Delilah was never in it for the love. Maybe she I don't know. Nothing against people that carry that description, but just a thought. So yes, what?
Can I get the curry gold rice and peas?
If I had $1 for every time you used a Jamaican accent on this podcast, I would have $2, which isn't a lot.
Walk on, bro. We take the gates to the city. Take them up the hill.
I can't.
It doesn't help that it's a horrible Jamaican accent either.
Okay, we gotta we gotta get back on track. Um. Anyway, so let that inform your mental image of Samson for the rest of your life. Anyway, thank you for that
He's
contribution.
got the big red, yellow, and green beanie on.
Oh my gosh. Wait, say my strength lies in the beanie in a Jamaican accent.
Wagwan, bro, my strength lies in the beanie.
Oh Lord. All right, we gotta get back on track here. Um, good place for a drink of water if I had one.
Yeah, no
Okay, so that's all staying in. By the way, I'm
Oh,
cutting
no.
none of that. You're getting canceled. So Delilah knew that Samson was strong. Obviously, everybody knew that Samson had this incredible strength. She also assumed that he could be bound with something, and it kind of goes into this pagan superstition that he had maybe some sort of like amulet or some sort of object his strength was tied to. And it's not that that's completely wrong, but it's a perversion of the covenant that God made. Because
Right.
yes, God's presence was able to abide with Samson because he kept this vow, but it wasn't literally his hair that was the object that was imbued with this power that if it was cut, he would lose his strength. As
Right.
we'll see in a minute, it's the presence of the Lord that gives him this strength.
Yeah.
I do like this note. It says, one might say that the honest answer to her question would be, I may be bound with the attention and affection of an ungodly yet attractive woman. Because in reality, it's not necessarily that he's able to be bound with anything. It's that he is bound by sin. He's bound by moral failure. That is Samson's true weakness.
Yeah.
And it just goes to show that it's not the literal cutting of the hair. It's not the literal wine. It's not the literal, it's not the end result. It's the root of the problem. It's the cause of it. It's the thought. It's um and actually there's something in that verse 1 that I want to go back to here in a minute, because it kind of informs the entire theme of Samson, and there's a reversal of that, a dramatic reversal. And I'm not, that's all I'm going to say because we'll get to it here in a minute. So verse 7 says, Samson said to her, if they bind me with 7 fresh bowstrings that have not been dried, then I shall become weak and be like any other man. So here we see he immediately lies to her, immediately just makes something up. And we kind of see Samson's sense of humor again, as we've seen throughout the chapter, or throughout these chapters, where he is a funny guy. Like he thinks of these things. He's a
clever
like the
guy.
warrior poet. He is, and he comes up with riddles. He comes up with poetry. Like when he piled the with the jawbone of a donkey. I forget exactly how it goes, but anyway, so he's a warrior poet. So he likes to come up with these little things, but he comes up with these very intricate things for Delilah to do. And I almost think it's because he thinks it's funny. He thinks it's a game, and he's like, I'm going to send her. So I think he knew what kind of situation he was in, because he's sending her on these wild goose chases, trying to find a way to bind him. I think he knew what she was going to try, and so he thought it was funny to make her try all these weird different things. And that's just kind of my reading of it. That's Austin's commentary. But based on what we see of Samson before, he did have a sense of humor. He did like to mess with people.
Oh yeah.
Other than just like he liked to do 2 things. He liked to mess with people, and he liked to clobber people.
Then the lords of the Philistines brought up to her 7 fresh bowstrings that had not been dried, and she bound him with them. Now she had men lying in ambush in an inner chamber, and she said to him, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. But he snapped the bowstrings as a thread of flax snaps when it touches the fire. So the secret of his strength was not known. Then Delilah said to Samson, behold, you have mocked me and told me lies. Please tell me how you might be bound. And he said to her, if they bind me with new ropes that have not been used, then I shall become weak and be like any other man. So Delilah took new ropes and bound him with them and said to him, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. And the men lying in ambush were in an inner chamber. but he snapped the ropes off his arms like a thread. Then Delilah said to Samson, "Until now you have mocked me and told me lies. Tell me how you might be bound." And he said to her, "If you weave the 7 locks of my head with the web and fasten it tight with the pin, then I shall become weak and be like any other man." So while he slept, Delilah took the 7 locks of his head and wove them into the web, and she made them tight with the pin and said to him, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." But he awoke from his sleep and pulled away the pin, the loom, and the web.
I just thought it was a funny image in verse 12 there, when it says, "So Delilah took new ropes and bound him," and it says, "And the men were lying in ambush and the men lying in ambush were in an inner chamber, but he snapped the ropes off his arms like a thread." So like I'm picturing them in this room, and they're like looking at each other like, "This is our shot," and then they're like about to go out, like out from behind the curtain, and they just hear whoosh, and they're like, "You know what? We're gonna cut the show."
I think it's funnier if he knows they're in there the whole time.
Oh yeah, and he's just
He
like
breaks those off, and they have to like awkwardly walk out through the front door past him.
like, "Hey, we're gonna
yeah, we're gonna get out of here.
We're gonna head out. We're gonna y'all have a good night." That's funny. And then this is it's interesting. Okay, and also a note in verses 13 and 14. Samson is, you can see sort of the moral decay. Not necessarily, well, I say moral decay. You can see the kind of decay of his conscience, of Delilah's nagging, because it's not that he tells her the truth, but he's getting closer to the truth. So he went from being bound with physical. He went from being telling her that something physical could bind him. So, and that's what people would assume. He's a strong guy, so surely something had to be unbreakable to him. Well, now we're throwing that completely out the window. The physical bindings are no more. Now he's narrowing it down. Okay, it's something to do with my hair. It's binding my hair, actually. So he's getting closer to the category of what his true weakness is.
Yeah.
And so now, after that, if you want to read verse 15.
Yeah. And she said to him, "How can you say I love you when your heart is not with me? You have mocked me these 3 times, and you have not told me where your great strength lies." And when she pressed him hard with her words day after day and urged him, his soul was vexed to death. And he told her all his heart and said to her, "A razor has never come upon my head, for I have been a Nazarite to God from my mother's womb. If my head is shaved, and my strength will leave me, and I shall become weak and be like any other man."
At the end of the verse 17 there, we see Samson's misconception about his own strength. Because in this verse, it says, "If my head is shaved, then my strength will leave me, and I will become weak and be like any other man." So even he equates his strength with his hair. My strength is because I keep my hair long. But go ahead and read verses 18 through 20.
When Delilah saw that he had told her all his heart, she sent and called the lords of the Philistines, saying, "Come up again, for he has told me all his heart." Then the lords of the Philistines came up to her and brought the money in their hands. She made him sleep on her knees, and she called a man and had him shave off the 7 locks of his head. Then she began to torment him, and his strength left him. And she said, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." And he awoke from his sleep and said, "I will go out as other times and shake myself free." But he did not know that the Lord had left him.
Exactly. So we see here, it's not that his strength left him. It's the source of his strength left him. The Lord left him. And when it says the Lord, that's a rendering of Yahweh.
Yeah.
And so literally Yahweh has left him. The source of his strength, the presence of God has retreated back because he broke the vow. He broke that Nazirite vow. So Samson was thinking, if my hair will leave, if my hair is shaved, I'll lose my strength. But he's not thinking that the presence of God will depart from him, because he's always had the presence of God, because he kept that vow. But he ruined the vow. He cut his hair, or Delilah cut his hair, but he basically played a part in it. And now the Lord has left him. And that is so much worse. So much worse.
Yeah, that's right.
So Keel I'm gonna butcher these names, but Kyle, maybe it's Keil, Keel, and Delitzsch are 19th century German biblical scholars. They noted that the Philistine princes believed. Oh wait, we kind of already covered that. But I kind of got ahead of myself. But basically, talking about how the Philistines did believe that there was some sort of physical thing that could be bound or that could be destroyed to rid Samson of his strength, because it was obviously a supernatural strength, like we talked about. He was a
Mm.
he. We can assume we can read into the text and think that they would have to think it's a supernatural strength. Obviously, if you kill 1,000 men with the jawbone of a donkey, if you rip a lion in half, if you uproot gates out of a city, it's a supernatural strength. So they're thinking, okay, supernatural witchcraft, some kind of pagan something. There's some kind of pagan idol or pagan artifact that we can
Yeah.
destroy or that we can bind to get this guy's strength. As soon as Samson broke away from his Nazarite status by sacrificing the hair he wore in honor of the Lord, Jehovah departed from him, and with Jehovah went his strength. So it's from Jehovah that we get our strength. It's from Jehovah that he gets his strength, even though his manifested in a supernatural way. Um, Samson was set up, and this is an interesting distinction, because
Mm.
usually we covered the Nazarite vow in the first episode, but the Nazarite vow started out as a voluntary thing.
Yeah.
It was a decision someone made to consecrate themselves to God, and they became a Nazarite. They took the vow for a certain amount of time. It usually wasn't someone's entire life. Samson's hair wasn't the visible symbol of a commitment Samson made to God. It was the visible symbol of a commitment God made to him. So it's a heavier Nazarite vow than what would be
Yeah.
normally, because a vow that man makes. I mean, man is flawed. Our vows really aren't worth much, but a vow that God makes, if we don't hold that our end of the deal up on that, that's some pretty that's some pretty serious stuff. So Samson's Nazarite vow was not a commitment from Samson to God. It was a commitment from God to Samson. Much
Mm.
like the law in the Old Testament, it was a commitment from God to Israel. It was something that God gave to Israel. It wasn't something that Israel drummed up and said, "Hey, we're going to be a people set apart, so we're going to follow, these 5 books of the Pentateuch. We're gonna carve these laws into the stone." No, it was
Mm.
God that said, "Hey, you are going to be my set apart people. You are the sons of Abraham. I'm going to
Right.
set you apart. I'm going to pull you out of Egypt. I'm going to give you the law to abide by. And if you abide by it, then my presence will be with you." So just like that, Samson was chosen by God, pulled out. He was given the Nazarite vows, and the Lord said, "If you abide by this, you will have strength." And he did not abide by it, therefore he did not have strength.
Yeah. Wow.
Um, and this brings us into a larger discussion, and it's something that Keelan Delitzsch talked a little bit about, but I wanted to expand on the difference
Mm.
between and the coinciding of faith and faithfulness. Samson maintained, and there's several different scholars that have talked about this, but
Mm.
Samson maintained faith in God throughout his life, but his faithfulness, which is active obedience, ebbed and flowed. So he had faith in God. He believed that God was there. He believed that God was with him. But his faithfulness, which another way to look at this is faith and works, his works ebbed and flowed. The way that his faith was lived out in his life ebbed and flowed.
Mm.
Sometimes he was a victorious judge. Sometimes he slept with a prostitute. He did not live a consistent lifestyle. Faith is an act of intellect interacting with the spirit. Faith in action transforms to faithfulness, which works out in our works. James talks a lot about our faith and our works. And it's interesting because there's no separating faith and faithfulness in Scripture. The Greek word pistis both means both faith and faithfulness. There's no separating what a person believes from the evidence of that belief in action. And I thought that was
Mm.
interesting because in that culture, there was no separating what you believed and how that belief worked out in your life, because
Yeah.
I believe it was just assumed that what you believe is going to inform your works. It's going to inform how you live your life. And now we've come to a point where faith and faithfulness, faith and works, are two separate things.
Yeah.
Um, we believe that we can have faith in God, but our works can be something entirely different. Our faith can be in the Lord, but our faithfulness doesn't have to be lived out in an everyday walk.
Yeah.
Um, when it says he did not know that the Lord had left him, talking about Samson, it represents the culmination of unfaithfulness, not the loss of faith itself. Bradford, and I have his full name somewhere, but I know his last name's Bradford. Bradford warns that a life bearing little or no signs of faithfulness doesn't necessarily mean the person lacks faith, but it does mean that they are being disobedient and spiritually going in reverse or reaching dormancy, a dangerous, even fatal position for a believer.
Yeah.
And I think that's such an important distinction to make, the difference between faith and faithfulness. And that's where
Hmm.
Samson found himself. Um,
Yeah.
he had faith in the Lord. He had, but it was his faithfulness where he faltered. We're going to touch more on this later, but Samson appears in Hebrews 11. His fundamental faith in God remained intact even when his faithfulness wavered.
Yeah.
And we see that through God answering his final prayer. It came from genuine faith even after his unfaithfulness. And Samson demonstrates that saving faith doesn't automatically produce victorious living. Faithfulness requires constant choice and discipline, which
Yeah.
is if we want to put works in here, we can say faith doesn't automatically produce victorious living. Works requires constant choice and discipline. So
Yeah.
we can have saving faith. We can be alive in Christ. Our names are written down in the Lamb's Book of Life, but it takes discipline and it takes action and it takes intentional thought for our faith to be worked out in our life in faithfulness.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, that's good. So yeah, it really just kind of going off your discussion here on faith versus faithfulness. Wanted to read this part in James 2 here, verse 18 through 24. But someone will say, "You have faith, and I have works. Show me your faith apart from your works, and I will show you my faith by my works. You believe that God is one, you do well. Even the demons believe and shudder. Do you want to be shown, you foolish person, that faith apart from works is useless? Was not Abraham our father justified by works when he offered up his son Isaac on the altar? You see that faith was active along with his works, and faith was completed by his works. And the scripture was fulfilled that says, Abraham believed God, and it was counted to him as righteousness, and he was called a friend of God. You see that a person is justified by works and not by faith alone. And in the same way, was not also Rahab the prostitute justified by the works when she received the messengers and sent them out by another way? For as the body apart from the spirit is dead, so also faith apart from works is dead. So, I mean, it's like you're saying, they're inseparable. You can't have just one and you can't have just the other. You know, you can't make it in this Christian walk solely by works. You have to have that faith, but then you can't have just that faith and not have anything to back it up, no works to back it up. You can't separate faith versus that faithfulness.
Right, exactly. And that's where we see Samson. You know, he had faith in God. He was an Israelite,
Yeah.
but that faith was not, his works faltered.
Mm.
So faith and faithfulness is so integral to the story of Samson.
And the Philistines seized him and gouged out his eyes and brought him down to Gaza and bound him with bronze shackles, and he ground at the mill in the prison.
Okay, so there are a lot of people who focus on the grinding at the mill. They see it as a place of transformation. They see it as sort of the dark night of the soul, if you're looking at it in story terms. But I didn't want to focus too much on that because there is a lot of material on that. I wanted to talk about how they gouged out his eyes, because in Samson's story, there are several times where it talks about his sight. And even going back to verse 1, can you read verse 1 one more time?
Samson went to Gaza, and there he saw a prostitute, and he went into her.
Okay, so key word is saw. So
Mm.
Samson's weakness has been his sight since the very beginning.
Yes.
It talks about how he saw the Philistine woman originally. So it's interesting how his weakness is his sight. His weakness is the things that he sees. He allows that to take hold of him. And the first thing the Philistines do is to gouge out his eyes. And so it's a judgment pronounced on Samson for following the lust of the eyes and the lust of the flesh. But it also connects to the larger theme of Judges. So Judges 17:6, and it repeats this a couple times throughout. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes, and that included Samson. But what does someone do if they don't have eyes? They are forced to sort of go back into themselves and reconsider. So Matthew
Mm-hmm.
Henry said, Samson's eyes were the inlets of his sin. And now his punishment began there. Now the Philistines blinded him. He had time to remember how his own lust had before blinded him. The best way to preserve the eyes is to turn them away from beholding vanity. Um, so he saw the prostitute, his eyes were gouged out, and then it's only after losing his physical sight did he gain spiritual sight. So it's only after that does Samson really get the big picture, because he no longer
Mm-hmm.
has his eyes to distract him. I know that's
Right.
gruesome and dark, but it is true. And we see that in verse 22. And I think that's, obviously in the natural way of thinking of things, if we shave off our hair, it's going to start to regrow. And so I think the point of mentioning it in verse 22, where it says, "But the hair of his head began to grow, grow again after it had been shaved." I think the point of that is to say something began to grow again in Samson that was sort of reconnecting to the Lord.
Yeah.
Did you have something you wanted to say on the shackles?
Yeah. Well, I like what it says here. This is BibleHub.com. It has a little
Mm-hmm.
couple paragraphs on this, which I thought the bronze shackles was just kind of an interesting thing for. It might be just like a thing to do for like a kind of like a prisoner with a lot of notoriety, someone like they're wanting to go after. So
Right.
they put
Right.
these
Yeah. Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
But this is what this says. Apparently, they're used in several places in the Bible. They're used in Jeremiah and Psalm, Second Kings, Second Samuel, and in Judges. So there's a few places where they're at right there.
Hmm. Right.
It says in the biblical narrative, bronze shackles are more than mere physical restraints. They symbolize the spiritual and moral bondage that results from sin and disobedience to God. The imagery of being bound in shackles is often used to depict the consequences of turning away from the divine commandments and the resultant captivity, both physical and spiritual. The use of bronze, a metal known for its strength and resilience, further emphasizes the formidable nature of such bondage. It serves as a reminder of the strength of sin's hold on humanity and the need for divine intervention for liberation.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I'd never thought about that. I didn't even think to look at bronze shackles when I was going through this, but that is a good point. Um, and it's interesting, those things that are found throughout Scripture that kind of are repeated themes and repeated instances that kind of point to the same thing.
Yeah.
But that is where Samson finds himself. He's now bound by the world, very physically. But you could say that he was bound by the world even before they put the bronze shackles on him. That's just an outward expression of
Yeah.
that bondage, for sure. Our boy Matthew Henry says again, Samson's afflictions were the means of bringing him to deep repentance. By the loss of his bodily sight, the eyes of his understanding were opened, and by depriving him of bodily strength, the Lord was pleased to renew his spiritual strength. So the reversal we see here, his physical eyes were opened, his spiritual eyes were blind, and the physical strength was present.
Mm.
Physical eyes were blind, spiritual eyes were opened, spiritual strength restored.
Mm.
Okay, so now we transition, some time passes, we transition into what would be, if this were a movie, this would be the giant, like, culminating scene that they spent all of the budget on.
Mm.
So if you want to read, actually just read verse 23. I know I have the note below verse 25, but I'm going to
Yeah.
do it on verse, if you just want to read verse 23.
Yeah. Now the lords of the Philistines gathered to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon their god and to rejoice. And they said, our God has given Samson, our enemy, into our hand.
Okay, do you know anything about Dagon?
Yeah, I know that it was a ancient fish god, basically. That's how he was portrayed, was a
Okay.
fish god. But there's some debate.
Yeah.
Like the note here says, some connect him more to fertility in the harvest or like grain. But from my knowledge, I know he was portrayed as the big fish guy.
Yeah, so the fish kind of came about, as far as I could find. He originally
Mm.
wasn't depicted as a fish. So how that happened was, and people started doing research into it, because in current times, dating back to like medieval times, he was depicted as a
Mm.
fish. But basically, what happened was he started as an inland god, as a god of the harvest and a god of wheat,
And
and
he
a fertility
migrated.
god. Well, so, so they started moving out, like the influence of Dagon started moving out, and
Mm.
it came to these coastal places where the word for fish was dag or dag. So there was kind of a connection made between Dagon and dag, which was a fish, even though Dagon wasn't originally a fish god. And then they sort of adopted him as this fish god because it was like a reverse adoption. So
Mm.
technically he is now, like in up to current knowledge, he is represented as a fish god, but
Mm.
originally he was god of the wheat and god of the harvest and a fertility god, which it's interesting because and he was one of like the top dogs in their
Mm.
uh, what do you call it,
Pantheon.
Parthenon, Pantheon, Parthenon, Pantheon or Parthenon.
Pantheon.
I don't. Is it Pantheon? Anyway, in the Philistine pantheon, he was the one, like one of the top dogs, which is interesting. But that is to say, we can go and apply that to a former chapter where Samson burns down the wheat harvest, and we can
Mm-hmm.
understand why the Philistines were so mad, because they saw that as an affront to Dagon, which was like their
Yep.
main guy.
Yeah.
That and also why they probably brought Samson to the temple of Dagon, to kind of parade him around and say, this is the Israelites' God's warrior, but we've put him under our feet. We've put him under Dagon's feet, and now we're making a spectacle of him. But
Mm-hmm.
go ahead and read 24 and 25.
And when the people saw him, they praised their God, for they said, our God has given our enemy into our hand, the ravager of our country who has killed many of us. And when their hearts were merry, they said, call Samson that he may entertain us. So they called Samson out of the prison, and he entertained them. They made him stand between the pillars.
So, in this situation, it turned into, it wasn't just Samson's reputation that was at stake; it was God's as well, because this is
Yep.
God's man. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
if Progressive, if they had Flow from Progressive down there, it's not just Flow that's in trouble; it's the name Progressive as well. But like, so Samson is the spokesperson for God at that time, and so
Yeah.
it's God's reputation that's on the line. So I think that's one of the reasons why it turns into such a spectacle and why they're cast down in such a major way. Um, so uh, in verse 26, it says, and Samson said to the young man who held him by the hand, let me feel the pillars on which the house rests. I may lean against them. And I think this is funny for two different reasons. One, kind of going towards the idea that Samson may not have been a big guy, and that the Philistines thought they had dominated him so
Mm-hmm.
greatly. They put a kid in charge of guarding him. He
Yeah.
wasn't surrounded by men with spears. He wasn't surrounded by it was literally a boy that was standing beside him,
Yeah.
guarding him. But
And,
the second reason it's funny. What were you say?
well, I was going to say, I also had a funny thought. Um, they're letting the guy, I mean, known for being super strong, in between the essentially the load bearing walls of their party house.
Yeah, it's like, hey, buddy, is this would this happen to be a load bearing wall?
Yeah,
By
that's
any
what
chance?
yeah, exactly.
Second question: could you lean me up against it? Oh man! So if you want to read verse 27 through 30.
Yeah. Now the house was full of men and women. All the lords of the Philistines were there, and on the roof there were about 3,000 men and women who looked on while Samson entertained. Then Samson called to the Lord and said, O Lord God, please remember me, and please strengthen me only this once, O God, that I may be avenged on the Philistines for my 2 eyes. And Samson grasped the 2 middle pillars on which the house rested, and he leaned his weight against them, his right hand on one and his left hand on the other. And Samson said, let me die with the Philistines. Then he bowed with all his strength, and the house fell upon the lords and upon all the people who were in it. So the dead whom he killed at his death were more than those whom he had killed during his life.
So Samson, a lot of times, this is classified as a suicide, and then because so it's like they classified as a suicide, then they bring up Samson being brought up in the heroes of faith in Hebrews, and then that is used to debate the morality of suicide.
Mm.
But we're going to circumvent that discussion entirely. Kiel and Delitzsch, going back to our German brothers, said Samson should not be classified as a suicide. He was not a suicide, but a hero who saw that it was necessary for him to plunge into the midst of his enemies with the inevitable certainty of death in order to effect his deliverance of God's people. So it's not that it was a suicide. It was a. I mean, you wouldn't say that a soldier who goes into a foreign country to defend knowing that death could be on the line, death is on the line. You wouldn't call that a suicide.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what
So
it immediately made me think of was a soldier in a trench in World War One, when where it says that it was necessary for him to plunge into the midst of his enemies with the inevitable certainty of death.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I mean, you can still know you're going to die, but you can still make it worth something, and it still not be, be a suicide per se.
Right. Yeah. I think classifying it as a suicide is a complete wrong take on this
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah, I would say so.
So I think so. This is another place where we can clearly see the typology of Christ in this. Obviously, with his arms outstretched to either side, and the destruction of the house of the enemy. But Matthew Henry said it best. He said, Christ was plainly typified. He pulled down the devil's kingdom as Samson did Dagon's temple. And when he died, he obtained the most glorious victory over the powers of darkness. Then, when his arms were stretched out upon the cross, as Samson stood the two pillars, he gave a fatal shake to the gates of hell, and through death destroyed him that had the power of death, that is, the devil, and herein exceeded Samson, that he not only died with the Philistines, but rose again to triumph over them. I think that's awesome. And I wanted to touch on even where it says in verse 30, it says, so the dead whom he killed at his death were more than those whom he had killed during his life. And if you flip that and look at Christ, you can see that the people the lives he touched during his life, how many more lives did he touch through his death and resurrection? The work that he did through his crucifixion, it greatly exceeded the quantity of what he did on earth. Because millions and millions of people have now been saved, have now been healed, have now been given a place in eternity with the Lord because of Christ's crucifixion and resurrection. So just like Samson, how there was more of a work done in his death than there was in his life. Through Christ's death and resurrection, there was more work done through his death than there was through his life. His disciples probably would have liked for him to stay and live out the rest of his human lifespan with them. But Christ knew the mission. He knew that there were so many more people all throughout time that depended on that sacrifice, to be made, on the resurrection to happen, so that all of humanity could have a chance to hear the good news of the gospel.
Wow. Then his brothers and all his family came down and took him and brought him up and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol in the tomb of Manoah his father. He had judged Israel 20 years.
Wow. So this is at the tail end. All this happens at the tail end obviously at the tail end because he passes away. But he judged Israel for 20 full years, and we're really not given that much insight into those 20 years other than kind of the low points. But again, going back to Matthew Henry, he talked about in episode 1, we talked about Samson's name meaning the sun. But Matthew Henry talked about it as a literal cycle of the sun. He rose bright, had an illustrious midday during his 20 years of judging, but set under a cloud. But yet even in setting, darted forth one such strong and glorious beam as to remain a type of Christ. I love how he put that.
Wow, that's beautiful.
So despite his failures, yeah, it really is. Despite his failures, Samson is listed among the heroes of faith, demonstrating that God's grace can work through deeply flawed vessels, and that repentant faith, and this line is very important. Repentant faith, not perfect performance, secures salvation. So even though our salvation and our faith should be worked out in works, it's not the works that save us. It's at the end, it's our repentant faith.
Yeah.
And just to cap off I wanted to read Hebrews 11 verses 32 through 40. And I'm going to read this and then we'll get our final thoughts because this is really the finale of our time in Judges. Since the
Mm,
beginning of the show, we've been in Judges. But we're going to move on to some different material after this. So this is really the finale of Judges. We're going to collect our thoughts on that after I read this. And this is Hebrews 11, verse 32. And what more shall I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, of David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, and escaped the edge of the sword, were made strong out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. Women received back their dead by resurrection. Some were tortured, refusing to accept release, so that they might rise again to a better life. Others suffered mocking and flogging and even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, they were killed with the sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, afflicted, mistreated, of whom the world was not worthy, wandering about in deserts and mountains and in dens in the caves of the earth. And all these, though commended through their faith, did not receive what was promised, since God had provided something better for us, that apart from us they should not be made perfect. And I think that's so important when we're thinking about these Old Testament heroes, that
yeah,
they're awesome stories. We can learn so much from them, but they're only types and shadows of the one that the scripture is truly about, and that is the
yeah,
person of Jesus Christ. And
that's
that
right.
is what's promised to us.
Wow.
So with that being said, we there are a few more chapters in Judges, but we aren't going to get to them on this show. We may revisit them. I'm not going to say never, but in the next year or so, we're gonna go in a different direction. But I have so enjoyed these studies in Judges.
Yes.
What what are you? I don't know. What are your thoughts? Some
I don't.
takeaways from the episodes we've done.
I don't know. I know I'm going to miss doing Judges a lot. Just getting to read these little microcosms, these little mini stories throughout Israel's time being judged before they had a king over them, over their nation, and just getting to see
Right.
these types of Christ live out, and Israel being desperate for their leader, for what will eventually be Jesus.
Yeah.
They want that king, they want that leader, and obviously, over and over and over again, it's demonstrated that man isn't perfect. Man isn't perfect. This person that's going to lead you, they're not the perfect leader. And the whole time it's just pointing you to Christ, pointing you to Christ. But I don't know. I know I've really enjoyed getting to go through this, and the way that excerpt from Hebrews just kind of, it really puts a bow on our whole show up to this point, pretty much. Especially those
Right.
last two
Yeah.
verses, and all these, though commended through their faith, did not receive what was promised, since God had provided something better for us, that apart from us they should not be made perfect. It just wraps it up just perfect, kind of what I was wanting to say. Uh, just being able to look and find just even that typology of Christ just on every
Hmm.
page, just
Exactly.
representing each of these characters. Uh, it's just been a really great pleasure and an honor to be able to get to study into this, and to share this with our listeners. And I know for that I'm very grateful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you said that wonderfully. I'm so excited for the future of the show. I'm so excited to keep digging into these stories. Um, I've it's just been a joy to go through Judges. You know, Judges is a very rough book. It's got
Yeah.
a lot of stuff in it that's just heartbreaking, but it's so powerful in that it points to Christ in such a strong way, and that's all of Scripture. But Judges is very unique in the way that it does it. For the future of the show, good book as we move forward. We may move away from more from a series structure. I thought about doing more of a kind of a slice of life type thing, just dropping
Mm,
in somewhere for an episode. We talk about it, talk about some background information, go through the story, and then maybe dropping into the New Testament next episode, just
mm,
kind of jumping around and showcasing these unique stories throughout
yeah.
Scripture in a more digestible way than, somebody feeling like they have to catch up on an entire series. Because we did that with Philemon, and I felt like that was one of our best performing episodes. I mean,
Yeah.
metrically, it really was. If you haven't listened to our Philemon episode, highly recommend it. I think it's one of our best ones. In the next couple weeks, we're going to have a couple of guests that we're very excited to have on, some familiar faces to the show. we're just excited to be here. As we move forward with Good Book, we hope that you will stay with us. We hope that you'll consume these episodes, but most importantly for the future of the show, we need you to like, to share, to comment. All this engagement helps get this show out to more people, and we think it's worth listening to simply because it's just breaking down the Word of God, breaking down the good book,
Yes,
so to speak. So with that being said, I think that will about wrap us up. So this is our finale on Samson, finale on Judges, and we are just looking forward to this new year, to 2026. So excited of what this year is going to bring, not just in the show, but in life as well. 2025 was good to us, but I think 2026 is going to beat it. With that being said, give us your final thoughts and sign us off.
Well, thank you all for joining us again on this episode. May the Lord bless you and keep you throughout this new year. Don't forget, look to Him, turn to Him for everything. Like Austin said, like, share, comment, all of the above. We'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to Good Book.